The Porsche 911 is something of a drivable cliché. It's one of those cars which is so easy to bring up in conversation, much like the Nissan GT-R, to just kind of hand wave away the best car at any given thing. The 911 is such a versatile platform, and it always has been, from rally to road racing to even street level performance. Just look at how many lap records and racing events and everything in between that 911s of all different types have destroyed, even up until the present day. But that's the thing. See, all jokes aside about how long the 911's been around for, how many times it's been reimagined, redefined and refined, well, yeah, that's true. Because if you do stick to one thing and make it over and over again, at a certain point you're getting pretty much perfect at it. And Porsche has been for some time now, I think, because the 911, even though it still gets better and better, has always been a formidable platform. Now, adding this one to the game, of course, always made a ton of sense. This has been in the Forza series for quite a while. It's a 1973 Carrera RS, of course dropping as part of Gran Turismo 7's February 1.29 update, along with a couple of other very notable classics which we talked about over the prior couple of days, the Honda and of course the Citroen. This one, I think, has kind of been overshadowed to some degree by both of those cars, as weird of a comparison as it is, because usually a 911 kind of naturally has the spotlight because they are so good. This one, though, isn't as oddball as the Citroen, isn't as quick as the Honda, so it's kind of third base, almost, out of the three. So, what is it actually like? Because again, compared to that Citroen, it's quite expensive. In fact, $750,000 is quite a lot for what is, by today's standards, more of a hot hatch, in terms of spec at least. Just over 200 horses. The weight, of course, is not that high. I mean, it weighs in at 1,075 kilos, so very good numbers, certainly for 1973. But today, well, it doesn't sound that amazing for $750,000. That's the kind of price you would have been paying for like a Super GT 500 car in Gran Turismo 6. So what can it actually do? Well, I know many of you have already bought the car, so I've seen the comments, even as far back as my initial review for 1.29, mentioning how the car is, of course, tail happy, as you'd expect from a 911, and to some degree it is a shame, I think, that 911s do still have that reputation, because one of the most impressive things to me about driving 911s in Beards and Cars, the real car reviews that I do here on the channel, is that in all the different 911s that I've driven, they really are that good. Like, they actually do live up to the hype. Even ones that aren't as impressive, like a 996 Carrera, which tends to be the lower end of the price spectrum, it's still a really good car to drive. These, back in the day, really were what gave the 911 that reputation. Stuff like the Yellowbird doesn't help either, being as leery as that is to drive in Gran Turismo. It's up there with the Cobra, for example, in terms of being that pro-level machine. This is not that unforgiving by any stretch, and as you'll see from even this event here, on a relatively short circuit without a huge amount of laps, it's still more than quick enough completely stock to take on, at the very least, other sports cars and what would have been supercars of the time, like the Countach. Now, in terms of tuning, you can do some pretty cool stuff to it. You can change the aero around, as you can with most of the 911s actually in this game. You could almost make like an RWB style 911 out of it. And just like in Forza, I would say that here in Gran Turismo 7, wherein of course this is technically the debut of the car in the GT series, it's not an essential purchase. It's not essential in Forza, and it's not essential in Gran Turismo, because, just to lay it out on the table, you don't need an old 911. The new ones are really useful, and for most of the same things that you could use this for, you could use a newer one with restricted power. You can get them down to similar point levels, because once you tune this one up to any kind of degree, you're going to be bumping up the points, of course. Now, speaking to the points, the standard points are less than 500, 487, so it's a pretty good level to be working with, especially with, as mentioned, just over 200 horses, which is pretty modest. It's one of the reasons why it's not that difficult to drive, but the fact that the weight is so low means that once you master that rear-engine, rear-drive platform, like the 1970s equivalent of a 911 GT3, that's pretty much what the Carrera RS was, the more track-focused, lighter, more hardcore variation. Even the colour schemes are quite similar to a GT3 RS from more modern times, with the different coloured wheels and stripes to match. It does have that innate track car kind of vibe, but it's also versatile. As I mentioned earlier on, you could absolutely take this off-road and it will still be good because it's small, it's light, and one of the only things which I think the 911 has started to lose, really in very, very recent years more than ever before. Even as recently as the late 2000s and early 2010s, this still wasn't a problem. It's only started to be, if you want to call it a problem now, and that is that the 911 is starting to get quite big. The 911 was always one of the smaller choices of sports car. Even something like a GT3 with the aero or a turbo with the wider arches, they still weren't that big. In fact, they're like the size of TVRs usually. That's great, because it means they're super nimble, they can easily run rings around like big Astons and Jags, and that was one of the reasons why they were so good. It's this supercar level machine in a small sports car frame, which at the same time, because of its shape, has really good space. For even a taller driver like myself, headroom was never an issue in a 911. Now though, they're much bigger. The latest 911 is a far larger car than they used to be. It's almost getting like GTR sized in some cases, and that does mean that you'll lose some of that manoeuvrability. Of course it's quick, but just by the sheer size of the car itself, it means you can't necessarily duck and dive between opponents as well as you would with an older car. And these roots of the 911, as far back as the early 70s, with this high performance variant, you can in a hands-on way feel where the legend really began. Because this is still super early days for the 911. The 911 had not been around for long at this point, and to already be this good, it really was a harbinger of just how legendary this line was going to become. Ultimately, I would say, as I mentioned earlier on, this is not really an essential purchase, with its relatively high price for the power, the fact that newer 911s are of course just as quick, so unless you specifically are a huge 911 fan, a completionist, or maybe you just want to use or need a lower performance point level classic sports car, well, under those circumstances, absolutely go for it. It's really good. Otherwise, I wouldn't say that you absolutely have to have it if you're not a fan of it in general. So tell me your thoughts down below on them, and of course, stick around tomorrow for the last of the cars from the pack, wherein I'll be featuring both of the Vision GTs together in the same video. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.